Dark, chosen ones, what happens when you stop hiding your power? There is a power inside you that has been waiting your entire life to be unleashed. You've felt it. You've known it. Even if you couldn't name it. Even if you were told to suppress it, silence it, shrink it. You've known there was something different about you. An awareness, a presence, an untamed force that didn't match the world around you. And maybe, for most of your life, you thought that difference was a curse. Maybe you tried to fit in. Maybe you tried to be smaller, quieter, easier to digest. But what if I told you that the very thing you've been hiding is the exact thing you were meant to unleash? What if your power isn't the problem? It's the point. This is the secret of the dark chosen ones. We're not here to be liked. We're not here to blend in. We are here to disrupt, to dismantle illusions, to awaken codes buried deep in the collective unconscious. We are not the ones who were cheered for at the beginning. We are the ones who were feared, rejected, misunderstood, not because we were wrong, but because we were right too soon. And the truth is, the world doesn't recognize truth when it's still wearing a cloak. It only celebrates it after it's become undeniable.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
So what happens when we stop hiding? When we finally decide that we are not here to play nice with the systems that taught us to be ashamed of our own fire? Everything changes, but not in the way you might expect. It doesn't start with applause. It starts with resistance. The moment you stop hiding your power, the world around you will begin to rearrange itself. People will fall away. Energies will shift. You will feel things you've never felt before, not because something is going wrong, but because the old version of you is dying and your real self is being born. But let me tell you something most people won't. Stepping into your power is not about suddenly becoming confident or fearless. It's not a glow-up. It's a breakdown. It's the moment you realize that the person you've been pretending to be can no longer survive at the frequency of your truth, and so everything false begins to fall away. The masks, the roles, the performances. And what's left is you, raw, real, radiant in a way that doesn't need validation, because it is validation. You begin to realize that your darkness was never evil, it was unprocessed wisdom. Your rage was sacred fire. Your grief was ancestral memory. Your chaos was the soul trying to break through the conditioning. And when you stop hiding, all of those energies stop fighting against you and start moving through you. You become a conduit, a vessel, a living reminder that power isn't about control, it's about clarity. And clarity terrifies those who are still living in distortion. People will project onto you. They will call you arrogant, dangerous, too much. Let them. That's part of the purification. Your presence will activate what they've buried. Your light will expose what they've hidden, and your path will threaten what they've normalized. But that's what you're here for, not to make them comfortable, but to make them conscious. And sometimes that means walking alone, not because you're unloved, but because you're uncaged. You start noticing how much of your life was spent trying to be palatable. How many times you watered yourself down just to avoid rejection. But now, rejection becomes a compass. You realize that every no from the world is actually a yes from your soul. You stop trying to be chosen because you remember you already were. You were chosen for this, not by the world, by existence itself. And the moment you accept that, the game changes. You stop asking for permission and start giving permission to yourself and to others just by being who you are. And here's the wild part. Your power doesn't come from doing something extraordinary. It comes from being fully you in a world that taught you not to be. It comes from walking into a room and not adjusting your frequency. It comes from speaking your truth without apology, from creating without compromise, from loving without attachment, from existing without filtering. That's the new revolution. Not louder, not flashier, just truer. But be prepared. When you stop hiding, you stop being invisible. And when you stop being invisible, you become a mirror. Some will see their own potential in you and feel inspired. Others will see their own suppression in you and feel threatened. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to remain, to stay rooted, to keep showing up even when it's uncomfortable. Because the more you do, the more you anchor a new frequency into this reality. And that's what the world needs. Not more followers, but anchors. People who are so deeply embodied in their truth that they shift the collective field just by standing still. You don't have to save anyone. You don't have to fix the world. You just have to stop hiding. Because every time a dark chosen one rises, a new timeline opens, a new paradigm begins, and what was once hidden becomes holy. So I ask you now, from soul to soul, what would happen if you stopped hiding? Who would you become if you gave yourself full permission to exist? Not the version of you that's tolerated, but the one that's true. What doors would open? What illusions would collapse? What world would you create? Because that's the real question. And it's not hypothetical. It's calling you right now. The unseen war. Why your power was suppressed and who benefits from your silence. There's a reason you were taught to hide. A reason your power felt dangerous even before you had words for it. You didn't imagine the fear in others' eyes when you spoke your truth. You didn't misunderstand the discomfort your presence created. You didn't make up the pressure to tone it down, to stay small, to play nice. That pressure was real. And it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a system that has always known exactly how powerful you are and exactly what would happen if you stopped pretending not to be. This isn't just about your personal story. This is about something much bigger. There is an unseen war happening, not with guns or armies, but with energy, attention, and belief. A war for your consciousness, a war for your soul. And the most effective way to win that war is not to destroy you, but to convince you to destroy yourself, to convince you that your intuition is wrong, that your rage is inappropriate, that your visions are fantasy, that your power is pride. If they can do that, they don't need to imprison you. You'll do it to yourself. And that's the brilliance of the system. It hides in plain sight. It rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. It praises obedience and shames originality. It teaches you to betray yourself and then applauds your maturity. It gives you just enough comfort to keep you from questioning why you're suffering. And when you do start to question it, it calls you crazy, rebellious, ungrateful. Because the moment you wake up, you become a threat not to people but to the program that runs them. So ask yourself, who benefits from your silence? Who gains when you doubt your inner knowing? Who profits when you suppress your creativity, your sensuality, your voice? Who stays in power when you believe you're powerless? The answer isn't always a person, it's a pattern, a matrix of inherited fear, a lineage of suppression, a collective agreement built on the lie that some are meant to rule and others are meant to obey. And you, dark chosen one, were born to break that agreement. You were never meant to fit in. You were designed to disrupt, to carry codes that don't make sense to a world addicted to comfort, to speak truths that make people uncomfortable because they expose what's been hiding in the shadows. And that's why your awakening didn't feel like a blessing, it felt like chaos. Because in order to wake up, you had to break out. You had to question everything. You had to lose what was never real. And that loss, that's what they fear most. You see, the system can't survive your freedom. It's built on your compliance, on your need to be liked, accepted, praised. So the moment you stop needing those things, you become unruly, unmanageable, unpredictable. And unpredictable people are powerful because they can't be manipulated, they can't be guilted into silence, they can't be seduced by approval. They move differently, they speak differently. They walk into a room and shift the entire field, not by force, but by frequency. And that frequency is your greatest weapon. It's not about being louder or more aggressive, it's about being clear, because clarity is disruptive. When you are clear in a world built on confusion, you become untouchable. You can't be gaslit, you can't be controlled. And suddenly the entire illusion starts to crack around you. People either wake up or walk away, but either way something changes. And that change is what you were sent here to ignite. But let's be real, it can be lonely. Walking this path means shedding layers, losing relationships, facing parts of yourself that the world told you to bury. And some days it feels like too much, like you're too much. But that's the distortion talking. That's the voice of the system inside your head. And once you recognize it, you can stop feeding it. You can choose a different voice. The voice of your soul, the one that doesn't just want to survive, but to remember. Remember what? That you were never broken. That your sensitivity is not a flaw, that your anger is not a sin, that your desire is not shameful, that your knowing is not arrogance, that your power is not a threat, it's a healing. Not everyone will see it that way. But you didn't come for everyone. You came for the ones who are ready, and when you stop hiding, they will find you. Not because you chased them, but because your truth became a beacon. So let me ask you this, from the deepest place in your being. If the system no longer had control over your mind, your heart, your voice, what would you create? Who would you become? What kind of world would exist if your power was fully unleashed? That's not just a dream, that's a blueprint. And it's waiting for you to remember who you are, not someday, but now. Because the war isn't over, but the moment you stop hiding, you stop being a victim of it, you become a force within it, not to fight with hate, but to shift with presence. And that presence, that is what they never saw coming. The power of presence. How dark chosen ones rewrite reality without saying a word. There comes a point on this path when you realize something astonishing. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. You don't need to argue, explain, or prove the truth you carry. You simply need to be, and in that being, raw, unfiltered, unshakably clear, you become a living transmission. You become a mirror that reflects what others are afraid to see in themselves. You become a reminder. And that reminder doesn't speak in words. It speaks in vibration, in frequency, in presence. That's the real power of a dark chosen one, not the power to command attention, but the power to shift reality by existing authentically within it. You've probably felt it before. You walk into a room and everything changes, not because you're trying to dominate, but because your energy doesn't match the performance happening around you. There's something about your silence that speaks louder than the noise. Something about your stillness that rattles people more than confrontation. That's not accidental. That's the power of presence. And it's not something you can fake. It's forged through fire, through the inner work, the shadow walks, the nights when you thought you were breaking but were actually being rebuilt. Presence is what's left when all illusions fall away, when you stop needing to be liked, when you stop adjusting your truth to be digestible, when you've faced your darkness and come out the other side not cleaner but clearer. That clarity becomes a frequency, and that frequency reprograms the space around you without effort. People start to feel things they've buried. They start to question what they've normalized. They don't even know why, but something in them starts to stir. You didn't say a word, you just were. And that's the kind of power the old world doesn't know how to handle, because it can't be bought. It can't be controlled. It doesn't play the game. It isn't the game. It's the glitch, the anomaly, the reminder that there is something beyond the scripts we've all been handed. And that's why presence is so disruptive. It short-circuits the illusion. It unravels the narrative. It brings people face to face with what they've been avoiding. And that's where the real transformation begins. Not when you give them answers, but when your presence makes them ask better questions. But this power doesn't come from ego. It doesn't come from trying to be powerful. It comes from the exact opposite, from surrender, from facing the parts of yourself that you once thought disqualified you from being divine, from embracing your own contradictions, from realizing that your wholeness includes your wounds. And when you stop fighting yourself, you stop fighting the world. You become available to a deeper intelligence, one that doesn't shout, one that doesn't sell, one that simply is. And you start to notice that this intelligence speaks through you, not with noise, but with knowing. You begin to realize that every room you enter is an opportunity not to dominate, but to anchor. You're not trying to change people. You're not trying to wake them up. You're just holding a frequency that says, I remember who I am, and you can too. That's it. That's the whole mission. And it doesn't require a stage or a title or a spotlight. It requires alignment. It requires integrity. It requires the courage to remain true in a world that profits from your false. So let me ask you something most people never consider. What if your greatest impact has nothing to do with what you say or do, and everything to do with what you are? What if your healing is contagious, not because you teach it, but because you embody it? What if your authenticity creates more ripples than your effort ever could? That's not a fantasy, that's energy. And when you align with the truth of who you are, that energy becomes undeniable. You become the kind of person who walks into a lie and makes it collapse, not with judgment, but with clarity. You become the kind of person whose presence makes others want to rise, not because you told them to, but because your existence makes mediocrity unbearable. You become the kind of person who doesn't need a platform to lead because your life is the message. And yes, it's subtle, it's slow, it doesn't always give you external validation, but make no mistake, it's real and it's powerful. And it's how new realities are born, not through force, but through frequency, not through control, but through consciousness. That's the magic of the dark chosen ones. We don't shout to be seen, we remember who we are. And in that remembrance, we become impossible to ignore. So I'll leave you with this. If you stopped performing, if you stopped trying, if you simply allowed your presence to be enough, what would shift in your life? What would fall away? What would rise up? What would finally align? Because the moment you realize your presence is your power, you stop trying to fit into a world you were meant to transform. The return of the architect. Building a new reality with unapologetic power. There comes a moment in every dark chosen one's path when you stop asking for a seat at the table and begin building your own. Not out of rebellion, but because you finally see the truth. The old table was never designed to hold the weight of your vision. It was built from fear, scarcity, and control. And you were never meant to fit into it, you were meant to replace it. That's what happens when you stop hiding your power. You stop trying to survive within the old paradigm and begin architecting a new one. Quietly at first, then boldly, then inevitably. You realize that you were never just a participant in reality, you were always a creator. But that creative force had been twisted, conditioned, domesticated. Your imagination was hijacked by systems that told you what was realistic, responsible, acceptable, and now, as your power returns, so does your ability to imagine again. Not just for yourself, but for the collective. This is where everything shifts, because when a dark chosen one remembers they are the architect, the entire matrix begins to bend. You begin to build with intention. Thoughts become tools. Words become spells. Choices become declarations. You stop creating from trauma and start creating from truth. And that truth isn't loud, it's precise. It knows where to go, how to move, what to release. You no longer waste energy proving yourself. You channel that energy into building, into manifesting. A world that reflects your frequency, and that world doesn't need to be massive or perfect. It just needs to be real, aligned, alive. This is why your presence matters so much, because when people see you living in that truth, they remember it's possible. You don't have to convince them, you just have to embody it. Your life becomes the blueprint, your choices become the architecture, and yes, it's slower than the old way, it's not instant, it doesn't go viral overnight, but it's lasting, it's true, it's the foundation of something that actually works because it was built from the inside out. And here's the wild part. As you build, you start to attract others who are building too, not followers, not fans, allies, reflections, souls who are also done performing, who are ready to create a world where their power isn't punished but celebrated. And together, without even trying, you begin to shape a new grid, a new field, a new frequency on this planet. One that doesn't require permission, one that doesn't beg to be seen, one that simply is, because it's built on truth, not fear. But to do this, you must be willing to burn what doesn't belong. You must be willing to disappoint those who only knew the version of you that was hiding. You must be willing to say no to comfort, to mediocrity, to compromise. Not from arrogance, but from clarity. Because now you see what's at stake, you see that every time you dim your light, you delay the future. Every time you silence your truth, you reinforce the lie, and you're done with that. Not because it's trendy, because it's time. So I ask you, with all the fire of your soul, what will you build now that you're no longer hiding? What kind of life, what kind of love, what kind of liberation will you design when fear is no longer the architect? You don't need a perfect plan, you just need to begin. Begin with one truth, one decision, one unapologetic choice, and from there, watch the new world rise. Because this is what happens when a dark chosen one stops hiding. They become the very force that reality starts to shape itself around. Not because they forced it, but because they remembered who they are. Now it's your turn. Build unapologetically, forever,